This is the Good Fire Podcast. Stories of Indigenous fire stewardship, cultural and social empowerment, and environmental integrity. Hey folks, welcome back to Good Fire. This is episode 4 of season 2, and we can't wait to dive into this conversation. New topics, new ideas, and yeah, just a great conversation. So yeah, Amy, you go ahead and introduce the folks we're talking to today.
Sure. So today we're kind of shifting gears a little bit, I guess. So still looking kind of at good fire and Indigenous communities and their stories, but we're kind of shifting now from fire burners to firefighters, as Matt Carroll puts it. So really after colonization, many Indigenous people stopped burning because of fire suppression laws and then went into firefighting as an employment, first kind of a forced employment choice, but then a chosen profession. And in my work, I've gone around and talked to people all over, Indigenous firefighters about what their jobs are like, what they like about it, what they don't like. And I've received so many stories from people. But really, I think people don't understand what it's like for Indigenous firefighters, and there's been no academic studies or anything on it. So working with Dr. Caverley, we kind of came up with this idea for a study about looking at giving voice to cultural safety of Indigenous firefighters in Canada. And so today we have Dr. Caverley and then Joe Gilchrist, who's a firekeeper from the Interior Salish Firekeepers who was also a part of the study, and a long-time wildland firefighter to discuss really the findings of the study and moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a really interesting discussion for me. Talking in the study, you were talking a lot about the idea of cultural safety and the experience of Indigenous folks working for wildfire management agencies and how that differs from non-Indigenous people, and some of the racism, some of the discrimination, and some of the different mindsets going into it. It was really, really cool to hear their stories and to kind of start to be able to understand and empathize with the situation and how it differs from even my own wildfire story, right? So yeah, it was very, very neat. Yeah, I can't wait to share it with you guys. So anything else to add, Amy?
Like I said, for me, I'm very biased, but I think it's a really important study for moving forward. I mean, if we look at Canada, there's very few Indigenous people who are actually in high decision-making roles within wildfire management agencies. And because of that, we don't really see good fire cultural burning on the ground in Canada because we don't have anyone to influence things. So yeah, it's looking at that. Dr. Caverley and Joe are both awesome and super impressive. So can't wait to hear more from them.
Yeah, me as well. It was really, really great. So without any further messing around, let's dive into this conversation with Joe and Natasha talking. Yeah, actually, I don't need to say what we're talking about because you just did. So here we go.
Perfect. So happy today to be joined by Joe and Natasha, who were part of the Giving Voice to Cultural Safety of Indigenous Firefighters in Canada study. And I'm really excited to get into the topic today. It's so important to recognize the contributions of Indigenous firefighters in Canada. And yeah, so happy that Natasha and Joe have put some more light on this topic. So maybe we'll start first with Joe Gilchrist. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. Joe Gilchrist, currently living in Merritt, but I'll be moving back to my home reserve in Skeetiston, where my dad was from. My mom is from Ashcroft, so my nation is Secwepemc and Naklakama. I started firefighting, I got interested in fire, of course, when I was young. We didn't have electricity and heat and that kind of stuff, so we used fire in our house to keep warm, of course, and to cook and all that kind of stuff, and even just to boil water and, have a bath and that kind of stuff. So we were always using fire. And a few things that I just noticed growing up. was how the elders used fire and talked about the use of fire. And as I grew up, we did do some burning of the grass and hay fields and out in the forest for deer habitat and our food and medicine and stuff like that. And I started firefighting when I was 15 years old, and I already had quite a bit of fire experience. And growing up on a ranch and stuff, we used hydraulic equipment and learned how to run a chainsaw and fall trees for firewood and all that stuff. So I had a pretty good outdoor background of camping and fishing all the time and hunting. So I really enjoyed firefighting, and I was used to the hard work. And in 1991, I started with the Merritt Fire Devils unit crew, which is a Type 1 unit crew out of Merritt. I started as a squad boss for the first season. And then the second season, I started as the unit crew leader, in charge of 20 people and all the equipment and food and that kind of stuff for 3 days, And we traveled all over BC and Canada, and went as far as Ontario and Quebec and Alberta, and right up to the northern border of Yukon and Northwest Territories. And then I was asked to take a 16-week course called the First Nations Fire Prevention Technician training in Mission at the old residential school in Mission, which they turned into a Justice Institute, and the tribal police trained there. So we did take some of the tribal police training as we were there, like the self-defense and the driving course and the swiftwater rescue training. And so graduated that in 16 weeks, and then got on full time with BC Wildfire, and took a lot of training. My boss then believed in a lot of training, so with the unit crew they gave us more training than we actually were required. And then when I got on full time, I took all the training that they gave me in Hinton, Alberta, and Salmon Arm, the advanced management courses and fire management and fire behavior, fire weather, all that kind of fire training. And I had a lot of fire experience from working in Merritt. Merritt's a real busy zone in the northern Sonoran Desert, and it's kind of right at the edge of the coast mountains. So we get a lot of lightning and that kind of stuff, and of course in the springtime we have the cultural burning that happens. And at that time we at the beginning of my career, we suppressed the fires, and then as part of my job and learning more about cultural burning and stuff like that, we began to not dig guards, to use the existing breaks and like a river, railroad track, highway, cow trail, deer trail, and not dig guards so we didn't disturb the land and introduce invasive plant species. We used the existing breaks, and then we burned the fire actually to a bigger area. We also did a lot of burns, different types of burns, for huckleberries, for elk habitat, deer habitat, and things like that. Even a mountain beaver one that was high up in the in elevation. So, anyways, I finished work in about 2012 or 2013 in that area, and within a few years, we started the Interior Salish Firekeepers Association, and that is to bring cultural burning back to the land and to listen to the elders and the storytellers and of how fire was used and why it was used, and to apply the fire to the land. And right now it's easy to do it on reserve, but off reserve on traditional territory, it's a lot of red tape. So we're still pushing our way through that and trying to overcome the obstacles of that bureaucratic red tape. And so that's where I am right now.
That seems like a very constant problem that we run into on this podcast, right? Is everyone's running into that issue. Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Jill. That was great. And so Natasha, just getting into yourself and your background and how you got into this world.
Sure. So my name is Natasha Caverley, and I'm a multiracial Canadian. So on my father's side is Algonquin and Irish. So my father and I are members of the Whitneyan area Algonquins as part of the broader Algonquins of Ontario Nation. And on my mother's side is Jamaican. And my involvement with Indigenous fire stewardship probably started about maybe 15 years ago. So I'm the president of Turtle Island Consulting based in Victoria. And so I was part of a specialized team that was funded through the BC Ministry of Forests looking at the mountain pine beetle initiative, particularly around working with the 103 impacted First Nations communities in BC that were dealing with the mountain pine beetle infestation. So as kind of one of the thematic areas, or we were looking at economic development, we were looking at some of the cross-cultural components, but an area that was quite significant in our different consultations across BC was around community protection, or the wildfire side of things. So that introduced me to individuals like Harry Spahan, like Thomas Blank, who I felt were leaders in that area with regards to working with the First Nations Emergency Services Society. So it was really interesting to see that there was this unique group of individuals that were looking at wildfire prevention, looking at wildfire resiliency, but had that Indigenous informed lens to it. So I was fortunate from that time onwards to be working alongside Finesse. And so that led to some different research studies that were funded through WorkSafe BC. And it was around health and safety because we were noticing that working alongside groups like Finesse, there really wasn't any literature or any information about Indigenous perspectives about cultural safety, looking at just general health and safety practices in the workplace, let alone in community or to do with emergency management. So fast forward, it was around 2012. We made a presentation in Prince George, BC, and that's where I met Amy. So we were presenting around the same time, and so we were really interested in one another's, research files, and we wanted to kind of continue that conversation. So it's probably now 10 years now that Amy and I have been in contact about just general curiosities and really wanting to lift voices of individuals who aren't necessarily always heard in mainstream media or heard in academic literature. And so again, this kind of was the opportunity last year in particular to work alongside, subject matter experts like Joe and Amy and some of our other team members to start some conversations and start collecting some preliminary data around, again, giving voice to cultural safety. So really having that opportunity to hear the different perspectives of Indigenous wildland firefighters and continue the conversation around Indigenous fire stewardship. So my background is not as a wildland firefighter, but I have a background in counseling and public administration. So my specializations are actually in organizational behavior. So always fascinated about group processes and organizational systems and how to create kind of transformative change at different levels of government or with different organizations across Canada. So that's my interest in joining this particular conversation.
Well, funnily enough, it seems like transformative change is exactly what we need in this area. So sounds like you're the right person to have on.
And Natasha too, I should say, and Joe, we're both instrumental as well in the Blazing the Trail Indigenous Fire Smart book that we put together. Natasha was the project coordinator on that, and Joe was one of the elders on that project. So yeah, we've worked together kind of on a few different things. So it was great to help advise on this project as well. Yes, I think that one thing that people don't realize is the important role that Indigenous firefighters have played in Canada. So, we've when fire suppression and fire exclusion rules and policies started coming through in Canada, there was kind of rules that came into place where, people within a certain distance of a fire had to go out and fight the fire. And at first it was volunteer and then it was paid. And most Indigenous elders that I've spoken to across Canada felt like their communities were targeted during that they were forced to go and fight fire, whereas other communities sometimes weren't, didn't have to participate as much. And so one, story that I always hear, and Joe, you might know a bit about this too, is they would say like that the firefighting bus would would come roll up like at a bar, and they would tell people like, you're either going out the front door to go firefight or you're going out the back door to go to jail. And so it created a real thing where, many Indigenous people were almost kind of forced into firefighting in the beginning. But then as it went, like about in the 1970s, 1980s, it became really kind of a proud career choice for many Indigenous people. It was great because they could go out in the summer, firefight, get paid, live in camps in the bush. And then in the winter, they'd, be able to kind of sustain their traditional cultural activities that they did. But then in the 90s, there was quite a downturn in Canada where it went suddenly to where it became more of like an adrenaline-filled thing, where firefighters, it was lots of university students that wanted to get into it. And that came with changes in training standards, fitness standards, crew structures, other things. But there still is a lot of Indigenous firefighters in Canada. So yeah, Joe, I don't know if you have any reflections on that, kind of brief firefighting history.
Yeah, when I first started, the training was just where all firefighters had to do the basic firefighting training was just beginning. And just before my time when firefighting, that was when they would just first they would go on the radio and they would say they need all able-bodied people to come in to fight fire, or else, like you're saying, they would go to a bar and just the police would be in the back, and like you're saying, the bus would be in the front. And I've heard those stories for sure. But when I started, it was you take the basic training and you volunteer to go fight fire. You get paid, and for that time, it was not too bad. I kind of remember somewhere around $6 an hour or something to fight fire. But it was a graduated system where the firefighter was the basic, and then there was pump operator, truck driver, and crew boss. And so it kept going up and up, and the more that you had experience, and the more money you got paid. And then I went through the unicrew where you're talking about, where the crews were set up in British Columbia. Anyways, there was initial attack crews, which is a 3-person crew designed to either go by truck or by helicopter. and go to a fire right away and do the initial work on the fire to get it under control and to try to stop it before 10 a.m. the next day. And then the unit crews, which is a 20-person crew, which is a sustained action crew, which is what I was on. And if the fires got away from the initial attack crew and was more out of control or threatening interface areas and things like that, or was just larger than the initial attack crew could handle, then the unit crews would get sent in, and then we had to have a 72-hour pack, and we had to be physically fit and highly trained and be ready to live by ourselves on our own for 3 days and do the work. And then they would have a camp set up, and then we would spend 14 days on the fire line, and then take at that time there was no 3 days off. You just you got back, you reset, and if it was time to go again, you would just go again. And then later on, they started saying, well, we need 2 days off and 2 days rest or something like that. Then it was 3 days, or 3 straight days away from the fire line. So, and then if we went out of province, it was 19 days on the fire line. And they would give us, I think it was 3 days off. And sometimes they kept us in the province. So they would put us into like a resort or hotel for 3 days, and then we would go back on the fire line again for 19 days. And I could remember doing that twice.
Yeah, one of the best stories that I heard about the bar thing, although, I mean, it's not the best, it was incredibly bad for the person, but one of them was a groom on his wedding night that somebody told me in Bridge River First Nation. So the police went and, picked up a groom in his wedding party and made them go fight fire in their, like, suits and, like, fancy shoes and stuff. Because back then they didn't, give them any equipment or anything.
Like, what year would that have been, Amy? I'm just out of curiosity. Like, how
I think that was about the 1950s or 1960s when that kind of stuff was happening.
And okay. And Joe, that's what you think as well? Like, the last time you heard that happening was in the 60s kind of thing, or?
Well, I started firefighting in the mid 80s. So yeah, it was definitely before my time in the 70s and 60s.
Yeah. Another problem for like the initial Indigenous firefighters was that first it was volunteer, but then they kind of started getting paid, but kind of like slave wages. And another issue was that they were given kind of a cashier's note that they had to go and cash at a local store. And many times the store would take half or 75% of their wages anyways. So, I mean, things definitely improved, but I know, like, for me, what I started hearing as I started working with firefighters and elders across the North is just a lot of stories from Indigenous firefighters about racism that they experienced on the fire line, discrimination, and other things, and how they felt that there was just a lack of career opportunities for them. Many, were 30-year, 40-year guys who'd been firefighting every summer, but, they'd be getting bossed around by like a guy fresh out of university. And they just, were so frustrated with it. So, I started chatting with Natasha and Joe and other people about, that we need to start doing something to actually kind of capture this information and these stories of like what's happening for Indigenous people on the fire line. So Natasha, I don't know, do you want to add anything? So how did the study come about kind of from your perspective?
Well, definitely what you're saying, like you and I were, chatting and, I think observations that we had individually or collectively with different projects we were part of is that we were hearing kind of, again, anecdotal kind of stories, and was like, how do we kind of more formally capture this, and not just in a province, but is there a way that, again, through different networks that we have and connections collectively, that we could start looking at that from a national perspective. So, but definitely with what you were mentioning is there just seem to be sometimes these lingering questions for us that, how is it that, somebody that self-identifies as Indigenous sharing stories with us, might go again 20, 30 years as a seasonal employee, yet never get quite through that initial even hiring process for a permanent position. And it just seemed that there was that very degree forward or specific kind of criteria that was serving as a barrier. Yet they were then asked some of the same Indigenous people to become kind of coaches or mentors to somebody that may have, again, some really solid credentials, but not necessarily having all of that local area knowledge, and particularly some of the understanding of the cultural protocols, because many of the communities over time, there was that sense that most of the communities being impacted around wildfires, particularly in the boreal forest, was Indigenous communities. So, again, we didn't want to make assumptions about that. So it's like, okay, how do we begin to maybe craft some questions and invite dialogue about that in a good way?
Yeah, and I think with government, at least from my experiences, like any level of government, is that you need that kind of evidence to be able to move forward with policy changes or things. And I think for Indigenous firefighters, we haven't had that. Like you said, it's always just been stories from people. But yeah, we really needed to kind of get something down, a great research project, which I think is what you guys have done here. And so I just wanted to point out too that Matt also is a firefighter, has some history doing firefighting. So Matt, I don't know, during your experience, did you work with any Indigenous crews?
Yeah, no, I definitely did. And in fact, I was initial attack. And my crew leader was an Indigenous gentleman who grew up, in Wabasca, Desmarais, fighting fire on unit crews and that kind of stuff. And that's where he learned, what he knew. Right. And I remember very specifically, he was always very frustrated with the way Indigenous people were treated, right, in fire, because it was always, the type 2 crews, like they're whatever, right, all these racist ideas about what they are and what they aren't. And he was always there teaching us right from the get-go. He's like, listen, if anybody knows what's going on the fire line, it's them. I was like, they live and breathe this stuff, and they have cultural experience. And he's like, if you ever have an opportunity to hang out with a unit crew on a fire, he's like, you're going to learn more from them than you ever will from the agency. Like, it's just what you have to do, right? But I was very fortunate in that I had that leader, and so he made it very plain right from the get go to kind of stop those racist, discriminatory remarks and those discriminatory ideas right off the bat. So I was very fortunate in that, but you definitely do see a lot of that, right? There's definitely a lot of that going on, especially as exactly like what you were saying, Amy. I was one of those university students that fought fire, right? Like I took 4 years of forestry, and I figured I knew what was going on with fire, and I'm going to go out there and make a difference, right?
You and a lot of other people.
Yeah, well, and you have a sense of entitlement, like, yeah, like I went to school, like I know what I'm doing. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, sure, I had some basic knowledge, right? But no, not really, right? No experience, no real knowledge. So it was definitely eye opening for me when my leader, his name is Sheldon Hoole, he's still fighting fire today. And when he laid down those ideas for me right off the bat. So I was fortunate in that, but I think it's pretty unlikely. I think most people don't have that experience of having somebody, push them in the right direction from understanding that there is another way of doing this. And the Indigenous perspective has a lot to offer, right? And I was fortunate that way, like I said, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's that idea about like the expert, Matt, like when, you're trained at university and stuff, they make you think that, once you pass this course, you'll be the expert in it. Yeah. So I think that's just kind of,
Well, I'm a professional, Amy. I'm a regulated professional. So I obviously know what's going on. I'm regulated.
A regulated professional or registered professional?
Well, registered professional, but it's regulated, right? Same thing. Yeah,
definitely. So Natasha, speaking of experts, I'm wondering how you came about putting the team together for this study, because I know it wasn't just you and Joe, there was a whole group of folks behind it.
Right. So one of the, I guess, values or principles that I've particularly been interested in, again, over that kind of 15 years or so that I've been engaged in various forms to do with Indigenous fire stewardship, is the two-eyed seeing approach. And and that is a term that was coined by Elder Albert Marshall and his wife Merdina Marshall, and they were working alongside an allied researcher, Cheryl Bartlett, and it's really bringing the best of both worlds, if you will, of Western science and Indigenous ways of knowing. So it's not one or the other. It's how do they work in sync with one another, just like two eyes that we have, that there are gifts and strength in both of those different types of knowledge systems. So kind of with that principle in mind, started to kind of brainstorm in terms of some different folks that, again, you and I have got to know over the years. And it was a culmination of Indigenous scholar practitioners and non-Indigenous allied researchers that came to the table. So, I'll do a shout out. Marty Alexander, he was one of our subject matter experts. Joe, again, was part of the process, again, in terms of his subject matter expertise as a firekeeper. James McGregor, he's a colleague of mine through the University of Victoria. He has a background in organizational development and quantitative research. Brad McDonald, he is a wildland firefighter and a structural firefighter of Métis ancestry. Kathy Offett Gardner, a counseling psychologist out of Alberta. So that was really great to have individuals as part of that team, along with Len Garris and Dave Watson.
Awesome. So, Joe, when Natasha reached out to you, what caught your attention about the study? Why did you want to join and be part of the team?
For me, I think it was just the experience that I had and wanting to pass it on and to be able to use the experience that I've had and to see how it's could be spread through a different way of thinking, because for myself, being a firefighter and my role as a firefighter as I progressed through was more in doing things, getting things done, and not talking so much, and not so to be able to kind of open up a bit, I guess, and spread out what I know. I think that's what. And it was just just my maturing and stuff like that too, and being able to pass that on.
Mm-hmm. Natasha, I actually had a question before we get too far into this. The concept of cultural safety has come up a bunch, and that was talked about a lot in the report. And I'm wondering because it's not a term that I was familiar with before reading the report. Can you explain, define that idea of cultural safety? Because I think it's basically the whole idea we're talking about here, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, in general terms, it comes out of discussions and research actually in the healthcare sector. Particularly some works out of New Zealand. And so there was a sense that Indigenous clientele utilizing the healthcare systems in various parts of the world, they were either feeling that there were barriers or denied access to quality services from in comparison to non-Indigenous individuals. So from that, it was that sense that people did not necessarily feel safe to access quality services in the healthcare sector. So that was kind of, again, with my health background or mental health background, became this isn't necessarily limited to the healthcare sector. We might be hearing, again, stories of that in different organizational settings. So that's where we wanted to kind of bring that term, albeit it's got its roots in the healthcare system. Does it have some form of application? Is it a similar definition? Is it a new definition that could be applied to wildfires and wildland firefighting? And so what we did see was that there were some similarities, is that, as an employee or somebody that was engaging in wildland firefighting and an individual who self-identifies as Indigenous, they want to make sure that they are feeling trust amongst their peers. They want to feel that sense of being welcomed into their work environment, so that they do feel that level of trust and safety, physically, mentally, spiritually, moving forward. So that means understanding and appreciating one's identity, that they can kind of talk about their cultural practices or protocols or engage in ceremony if that's part of their healing and helping or stress management strategies, without feeling that sense of, somebody's going to retaliate or think less of them. So again, those were areas that we wanted to capture in terms of cultural safety.
Yeah, good question, Matt, because I think cultural safety for me is, I don't know, it's almost like the word resilience, where people, have been starting using it and throwing it around, but don't really have an idea what it means. Like, I hear it all the time in my work in wildfire evacuations. Like, we need to have culturally appropriate or culturally safe evacuation centers. Okay, like, great, but what does that mean? Like, it's so different for different people. So I think, like Natasha said, that was one thing from this study, was just the ability to be able to ask people, like, what do you think when you hear that word? Like, what do you want to see in your workplace? So I think that was really unique. So yeah, Natasha, I think maybe we'll just, for this study, you guys did a survey and a virtual circle as well?
Yeah, that's right. So, ideally, if there wasn't a pandemic, I think we were envisioning that we could actually physically meet with people face to face, like literally around, in almost like a fire camp, and just, have our recording devices with our informed consent and just start the conversation. So, we had to be creative, based on the pandemic situation. So we did start off by having a survey. And again, I really want to thank all the people who participated, because it was at least 60 plus questions for the survey of kind of the core questions that we had about occupational health and safety and cultural safety. And then there was an option for 4 other sections. And so, we had over 100 people participate in that survey component across Canada. So really appreciated that. And then we also had, as a complementary piece to the survey, individuals who wanted to share their stories kind of through a virtual fireside chat. So we use Zoom. And so that was an opportunity to have about 6 participants engage with a bit more of, again, that qualitative aspect. So we had some semi-structured questions, and then we just kind of heard and kind of captured some of the different stories and themes that were coming from that. So again, we wanted to balance it off, that it wasn't just numbers. We want to also recognize the stories being told, and then putting those together allowed us to kind of start identifying some different themes that we have in a final report.
Thanks, Natasha. So I was just thinking, I have here just some an overview kind of your survey. I thought I'd just quickly read through from the results. So like you said, there was over 100 participants. It was primarily First Nation males who participated. The average age was actually between 40 and 49 years old. And generally, the average participant had between 10 and 14 years experience. So representation from every province and territory except Newfoundland and Labrador, despite our best efforts, I will say, to get people from there. And people who participated worked in wildland firefighting in a variety of positions. So everything from an entry-level crew member to a director or a manager. So there was really a diverse range of views. The primary reason why many went into firefighting was to be close to the land, to be responsible to Mother Earth. And lots were referred by a family or a friend to get into that type of employment. The main work concerns brought up by participants were the lack of career advancement opportunities, cultural safety and discrimination in the workplace, as well as long-term impacts on their physical and mental health, especially as many people know with all the new stuff coming about smoke and the impacts of smoke on wildland firefighters. That seemed to be a concern. So many who had left firefighting left because they had either a change in career focus, they felt there was a lack of opportunity, or the pay was too low. And so interestingly as well, 50% of participants in that survey had experienced a close call. So that would be something where, they were very close to physical injury or death. And that was from unexpected fire behavior, helicopter related, or falling trees or snags. And then getting into the discrimination part, 53% of your participants experienced discrimination. 11% were unsure. So, for those people, we're probably imagining that they did, unfortunately, have that. And most of that racial discrimination either came from other crews or from their supervisors. Generally, their own crews were very supportive. And so Natasha and her team also came up with a variety of recommendations for improving cultural safety for Indigenous firefighters. So that is a very quick overview of some of the major findings of the study. Like Natasha said, it was a big survey, kind of the first initial one to lay a big groundwork. And you can find it on Natasha's website for her company, Turtle Island Consulting. And Matt will probably have the link below right in the show notes. There's an executive summary there as well as the report. But I just wanted to ask you, maybe we'll start with Joe and then go to Natasha. Was there anything that really stood out to you from this study? Anything that you were, either surprised to see or maybe, that you knew would come out in the results?
I think the term cultural safety, which I needed to get that explained to me a few times before I could wrap my head around it. So I think that was one of the things that I was quite surprised about, that it was pretty prevalent across Canada, and that it was, I guess, wasn't totally surprising to me because I went through a lot of that systematic racism. I think to me it was the effects of that systematic racism on firefighters. As you think back on your career and think, oh yeah, that's what it was. That's what happened to me, and it was cultural, to do with cultural safety. Mm-hmm. That was one of the things that I was quite surprised about.
Yeah, Joe, I know you've shared with us some stories before of incidents that you went through in terms of racism or harassment on the fire line. Do you have a story that you want to share, just so people kind of get an idea of what we're talking about here?
Yeah. So, okay, we went out of province and we were going through the safety briefing, and of course there's a British Columbia liaison there that is between us and the management of the province that we're in. And the liaison was telling the management that we were the best crew in BC, that we did this and we're able, dig guard this fast and all this kind of stuff. So they were explaining that they fight fire different in their province, and that we're going to fight fire the way that they do. And I said, yeah, okay, I'm ready to, to learn different ways of firefighting and different field types and all that. But it turned out that they wanted us to dig guard in their province, which you can't do because the soil is all wrong. It's too spongy. There's too much roots. There's all kinds of it's like 3 feet of roots and stuff they got to dig through. But they wanted to. Well, they claimed that they wanted to test that we couldn't fight our dig guard to control the fire. So I think we spent 3 days digging guard, and we would say, we could just lay a hose here and be done, but they wouldn't let us do that. They wanted us to see us dig guard the way that we did in BC and kind of make a mockery out of the different styles of firefighting, I guess. they're paying us a lot of money as Type 1 firefighters to be in that province and to slow our production down to probably 1/10 or even more than that. They're paying us, for 3 days of work, we did probably about, I think it was somewhere around 800 meters of guard, which, if we put that in hose day, we could have done that in probably 30 to 45 minutes. So, they wasted, the wages of 20 people just to put us down, I guess.
Yeah, I know, Joe, you told me too, though, about how you loved meeting other Indigenous people from other provinces and, just getting to chat about fire in different territories.
Yeah. So meeting different people from different nations of Turtle Island is really cool. The stories are pretty much the same, as we talk, and the work ethic, knowing the land and being from the land and living on the land and not having to rely on the grocery store and things like that to be able to live and to be able to look after yourself, how to start a fire and how to build a shelter and how to keep yourself safe and all that kind of stuff is the same through the nations and stuff like that. So, and to learn as you go through from talking to different people from different nations is really cool to see that that the similarities between firefighters.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Joe. So, Natasha, same question to you. Is there anything really that stuck out or that you want to kind of focus on a bit more here?
Yeah, I think a few areas that jumped out for me was, and it kind of ties in with some remarks you had made earlier, Matt, that pivotal role of a supervisor. So, I mean, when we were looking at the data from the survey and also from the virtual kind of fireside chats, what was coming up is the role of the supervisor kind of made or did not make for a kind of a comfortable experience for people, what they were sharing in terms of cultural safety or feeling that occupational health and safety. So if there was a supervisor that leaned in and was really receptive of understanding, who some of their different team members were, respecting various types of, cultural practices, that really lifted the spirits and made for, probably more positive comments or responses about feeling welcome and included in their workplace. And then on the flip side, if there was a supervisor or stories being told that, they were kind of keeping things very matter of fact, very kind of cold or distant or maybe marginalized Indigenous wildland firefighters, that made for then the story to kind of continue, that people started to lose interest, or maybe they started to kind of phase out of wildland firefighting into another career path. So just wanting to highlight that particular piece is that supervisor, whatever kind of, terminology, whether that's kind of the squad boss or the unit crew leader, just how important those roles are, not only for the technical aspects of what they're being deployed to do in wildland firefighting, but to create, a really healthy group process becomes really important. And I think another couple of areas that kind of stood out for me is just the recognition that as we were posing different questions about kind of physical illnesses and injuries on the job and mental health illnesses and injuries, there still is a leaning as of 2021 to participants kind of disclosing a little bit more about kind of the trips, slips and falls, or kind of the twisted ankles or the broken bones, and just sharing some of their experiences around that, as opposed to sharing about mental health concerns. It's certainly there. I think we have all heard in various circumstances, the role of trauma over time, of being exposed to kind of, some of these high risk environments, what they might be seeing in terms of the impacts to, the wildland, to people, to communities over time in terms of, post-traumatic stress disorder, and other feelings of anxiety or depression, but there didn't seem to be that level of comfort of disclosing that level of information versus talking about, again, broken bones and things like that. So, and then I think another piece that kind of ties in with the name of your podcast about good fire is, it was really great to see that as Indigenous people were sharing their stories of being wildland firefighters and their different experiences over time, that there was a recognition that not all fire is bad. So there was, again, that call out that, how can we begin to fully embrace some of our traditional ways of knowing and our ceremonies and our different practices to bring fire or revitalize cultural burning practices as part of, our roles and responsibilities in wildland firefighting. So not just about suppressing wildland fires, but also is there other ways to bring back good fires onto the land? And again, it didn't seem like that was isolated to just BC or Alberta. There seemed to be, again, one of those constant themes or across Canada as well. So those were some different highlights kind of tying into what brings us to today's conversation.
Thanks, Natasha. And Joe, I know that you've spoken a lot about mental health and firefighters, and just even in your own career, the lack, you had a few incidents of any sort of mental health support for you and your team.
Yeah. Of course, PTSD is a large part, and it just in the 2000s, I think, probably around after 2003 anyways, I could remember that it was becoming more prevalent, and 1994 was the first time that I was diagnosed with PTSD, and I had no idea what it was, and actually I didn't care, and I had no idea what the effects were and all that kind of stuff, and as time went on, there's another one called accumulated stress syndrome, and another one about exhaustion. And so like being on standby for like 24-hour standby without any rest, always having to, like, I could remember putting my pager on my pillow right beside my ear so that I wouldn't miss a call, because you're getting paid to take off as soon as you get a pager call and stuff like that. If you miss it, then a fire could get away and you could be in a lot of trouble and stuff like that. So having the cell phone, sleeping with the cell phone right beside my ear, things like that, it gets to you after a while when you're so tired and so exhausted. You work in long hours and things like that. Then you get back home and you're still on standby to go. And, so all that type of exhaustion and stress and, and the PTSD from close calls and different things that happen in your life, it all is very real, and it really affects a person, whether they think they're strong or they're fast or they're the best or whatever. Eventually that stuff just gets to you, and there's really nothing you can do about it. You need professional help.
Mm-hmm. Of course. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm just trying to scan through the report here too. I know. So one interesting thing about this study is that it wasn't only just questions, where you selected a choice. It was also, there was open-ended sections where people could share their stories. And I know, Natasha, that we captured a lot of stories about close calls, issues kind of with PTSD and other things. Yeah, there was quite a few people actually who talked. So as Natasha was saying, only about 17 respondents actually filled out the mental health section. So that was an optional section. So yeah, we didn't, there wasn't a huge response, but I think again, it was just that comfort factor where, people were, just didn't feel as comfortable just kind of disclosing those things. And I think especially in Indigenous cultures, there's, sometimes in our nations as well.
And it's really,
men don't want to kind of disclose those things. Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
It's really hard to know what is affecting you at the time, and even when you look back on it, trying to think about the impacts of different situations and critical situations that happen to you, and at the time you live through it and you do your best that you can, and you kind of leave it behind, but mentally you didn't leave it behind, and it's there in your mind, and it still affects you, even if it's in your rest or lack of rest, that kind of stuff. It's still there, but to try to say it or put it on paper, it's not the easiest thing to do, and to admit that, yeah, there is something wrong, or even to know that there is something wrong, that's even different. That's when you need that professional help, to be able to talk about it and get it out, and for them to say that, yeah, this is what happened to you, and just pull it out of your system, I guess, to show you that there is something wrong.
Yeah, well, I think even just with this study, now knowing that about 50% of people had, Indigenous firefighters had either almost seen an injury or a death in their job. That is a huge percent of the workforce, right? Compared to other jobs where, it's not very common to see someone near death or injured.
Well, that's the thing.
So I was just going to go ahead,
I'll just
Matt.
say that's the thing too. You think about, like Joe, for yourself example, you've been fighting fire for how long now? It's been decades, right? That you've been fighting fire. Most non-Indigenous people that get into wildland fire, they might do it for 6 or 8 years, but they're not in it for decades, right? And it's like you compare it to something like structural fire, right? Like there's structural firefighting, at least I know in most cities, they have psychological support. They have that route, they have that means to seek support, right? Whereas I can't remember anything in wildland fire, at least in my experience, of mental health support or anything like that. Like it wasn't even on the table. So I can't even imagine for someone like yourself who might be operating through like a contract basis or however you were, if you're working directly for the government or not, how do you go, what supports exist for you, right? What about right now? Like currently, what mental health supports exist for wildland firefighters, and especially for Indigenous wildland firefighters?
I do know that agencies are recognizing this as a big issue. And I know Parks Canada is doing some after action things now on mental health with some of their fire crews and incident command teams. But, for the average seasonal Indigenous firefighter, I think that it's still really lacking any type of support.
That's an interesting fact, right? When you look at structural fire and all these other types of fire that there's plenty of support, and then this is just completely non-existent. Yeah, it's definitely concerning for sure, at the least.
Yeah, well, another thing that was of concern for me, and it wasn't surprising. Like, I think that Joe and Natasha and the rest of the research team also expected it, was just the high number of people who experienced racism in their job. Like, for many other career paths or other jobs, you don't have 60% of people who've experienced racism. So for me, that's really concerning that that's happened. But another interesting thing was though how many people said that they loved the job. Like, that's what, like, it was like 90% of participants that we had said that they loved firefighting. Like, it was one of their favorite things. And so, yeah, the fact to me, that people are experiencing these close calls, experiencing racial discrimination, but still in the end, say that they love their job, it just shows how important it is to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's very disheartening though to see that overwhelming racistness in the report, right? That it's so prevalent.
I think though maybe Joe, you can speak better to it, but the Indigenous firefighters that I speak to, it's almost expected. Like, it's just,
and that's even worse.
Like, I've heard, I've heard though of crews where, they won't even sit at a table. Like, when they're at fire camp, the Indigenous crews kind of sit somewhere and the non-Indigenous crews sit other places. Or I've heard too of Indigenous crews being sent to kind of the crappier barracks or like camp areas, because it's like, oh, well, there are Indigenous type 2 crews, like, who cares? Whereas the helitack or the fancier crews that are mostly non-Indigenous people will get to stay in better settings. So, I mean, again, though, lots of that is just stories, right? Like Natasha was saying, kind of these informal stories that we hear all the time. So it's great to actually have a number now as a start.
Yeah, I know. I've definitely lived through all of that, and it does, every single thing that you said, touched on different parts. The management sitting by themselves, and then the non-native type 1 crew sitting by themselves, and then the native crews, whether they're type 1 or type 2 or type 3, would all sit together, and that's where all the laughing and all the fun was, and everybody is having a good time. I could remember being on the fire line, and the boss was coming through, and my guys were busy working, but we were always getting our objectives done for the day and more, and but my guys would be laughing and having fun, and he came through and he said, "Do you get those guys to shut up and get to work?" And I said, "They are working," and I told him to sit and watch, and so he just kind of didn't let the crew see us, and we just sat and watched, and the guys were messing around with each other, joking around and stuff, but the work was getting done, and he watched for about an hour, and then he goes, "Oh yeah, I see you guys are having fun while you work." And I said, "Yeah, that's the best way to work, if you're having fun and you're getting the job done. You're actually getting the job done a lot faster, and it's not as hard work and stuff like that. Even though you are doing some of the hardest, most dangerous work, you're just having fun doing it."
Yeah, I had a firefighter once tell me, like a non-Indigenous firefighter, that he was like came out of university, was like a higher supervisor, and he got put in charge of some Indigenous crews, and he said he'd like go check on them at about 12 or 2 in the afternoon, and he said they were always sleeping in the trees, like having a nap, and he was so mad, like, what are these guys doing? This is like, just enforcing those stereotypes, like this is the laziest crew. But then what he found out after that was that the Indigenous crews were actually leaving camp early, like at 6 a.m, because they knew that that's when the fire behavior was like the lowest intensity. So they would go early, fight the fire. Then when the, fire, like when the things were kind of taking off or whatever, they would just, sit back, rest. And then when things slowed down in the evening, they would go back out and firefight again. So what he saw, was these lazy guys just napping in the woods. But what they were doing was using that Indigenous knowledge of fire and what they'd seen in their own communities to, be more efficient in firefighting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To that note, Joe, I wanted to ask you, like, in your experience, like, it seems like a lot of this comes down to, the Western Fire Authority being in charge of these situations, and there not being any appreciation for or understanding of whatsoever of Indigenous fire management and Indigenous ways of knowing. How much knowledge exists in the current system, in the current Western system, for these things? And do you think it's possible to, like, for this current system to appreciate Indigenous, fire management strategies and to start to, change the way that these racist protocols take place and maybe change the way that we manage fire?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The knowledge of the land and the medicine and the animals and all that kind of stuff, but even living on the land and knowing the wind patterns and the way fire burns through the land. For somebody that comes out of a university and then is put in and even maybe even from a different country, like say Australia or someplace like that, and they come and they're the boss of the fire, but they really don't know the land and what to expect. They have the Western, the numbers, of what should happen, and they have the weather forecast. They have all the different sciences that go along with it. But to get from one place to another, just having the local knowledge, just to be able to move one crew from point A to point B. If a road system is on a map, but it's not there anymore, or it's grown in, or it's, something's wrong, the people that live there know best of what, of that, kind of trumps the Western science stuff. But the arrogance, I guess, of Western science and, the position of the management over the firefighters, there's a disconnect there that definitely needs to be changed or fixed. And when it does, I think that firefighting would be a lot more efficient, rather than we know best and you guys are going to do this and this is how you're going to do it. And generally that doesn't, it generally doesn't work, I guess.
Well, I feel like I've been fortunate enough to be able to be a part of these podcasts and to learn a lot about Indigenous fire management, that kind of stuff. And over the course of learning about it, I feel like anybody would be, given the opportunity to have open and honest dialogue about these issues, and to hear from Indigenous people, Indigenous fire practitioners, and that kind of stuff. I feel like most people are going to get on board once they've had an opportunity to understand those ways of doing it, right? And I feel like the reason, and this is just me, but I feel like the reason that a lot of these people are opposed to these ideas, and there is that arrogance, like you said, right? And I've seen that as well, as even as a non-Indigenous person, I've seen it against Indigenous people on the fire line. I feel like the reason they're opposed to these ideas is just because they don't understand them, right? They've literally never had a conversation with someone who's been able to explain it to them in a way that can take them out of their world, right, and into someone else's culture and someone else's way of knowing. Do you think it's possible to change that system? To, like, I don't know how you begin to have those deep dive conversations with people, right? But like what Natasha had said earlier, what the study showed was that all it took was a good supervisor that was willing to listen and show true leadership to make a big difference in in the work environment, that kind of thing. Do you think the same is true with Indigenous ways of knowing?
I think Joe's modest, but Joe has done a fantastic job with mentorship and speaking out, like he said, kind of using his voice now. Same with Harry Spahan, and there's other firekeepers as well who've really been, and I think it's those one-on-one conversations that can make the difference in developing those relationships. Because, people don't understand there's also power structures at play, right?
Totally. Yeah, like how do we create that space for Indigenous ways of knowing, right? Indigenous cultural fire management. I feel like it can be done if the people were given the chance to understand, right?
It seems like it's improving. I've had some contact with UBC and some of the curriculum changes and the local NVIT here in Merritt. Of course, NVIT is a First Nations college, anyways. But I think that adding it through from kindergarten to high school, the Indigenous learning and having some basic knowledge and contact, to be comfortable to talk with First Nations people and to know that there is, something different.
That scientific knowledge is nothing without context, right?
Yeah. And I think too, just in terms of the study as well, like when you see firefighting, like, firefighting recruitment videos for wildland firefighting, it's always like the big fires, flying in a helicopter, like the intense music, like you're in some Hollywood blockbuster movie, right? Like
Slow
that's how
motion.
they try to get people, to want to be firefighters. But what I think Natasha and her team found in the study was that, for Indigenous people, that's not why they go into firefighting. They go in because of that. They feel that responsibility and they like being out on the land. They don't necessarily want to be, in front of the big fires that they can put a selfie on Instagram, although maybe some probably do. But in terms of the older firefighters, they want to be out there because of that relationship that they have with the land. And so it's almost like we need to, if you want people like that in firefighting, we almost have to change the whole way that we recruit people. And I think maybe like the Indigenous Fire Guardians work that the Indigenous Leadership Initiative group is doing that's one way, where you're looking at like guarding the land, but from a more holistic perspective, rather than just this adrenaline filled, like go like rappel out of a helicopter to put out a fire.
I think those messages definitely came through, and also who the messenger is of like, engaging in wildland firefighting as a career choice. That came out as well, that it would resonate more, not to say that videos aren't important. I think that is a way that people are leaning in more in terms of kind of snapshots about different types of occupations, but also hearing stories from a family member or a friend, that was very impactful to individuals, saying like, oh, I am the next generation in my family that is continuing in wildland firefighting. So there was an honor and a pride in the profession, and then also that Indigenous pride as well, that there was that sense of connection to place and one's identity, that there was that opportunity in an occupation where I can be close to the land, as you're saying, or Mother Earth, and also making a positive contribution to safeguarding or protecting my community now and in the future, or continuing that for generations.
Thanks, Natasha. I think too, just one of the things that you had kind of talked about there was just the career development opportunities and advancement. And one thing that I think we found in this study, and that I've heard a lot, is that, the Western education requirements really hold back Indigenous firefighters in advancing in fire management in Canada. So you have, folks who've been on the fire line maybe 30 years, but they might not have a high school diploma. So they would never be accepted by a wildfire management agency as, a certain type of permanent employee. And so there really needs to be, and we talked about this in like the blueprint for wildland fire in Canada as well, that there needs to be experience equivalencies for Indigenous people where, you know, we're recognizing that land-based experience as well in terms of, you know, getting people into these positions. Like I know so many guys who are, you know, like I was saying, 20, 30 years, you meet them at every fire camp, Indigenous guys, so knowledgeable, and they're kind of still in, you know, crew boss roles or that type of thing instead of in permanent employment where they, you know, should be and could be contributing a lot.
Yeah. Some of the senior people that are on fire crews and things like that, instead of moving up, you know, they used to be a danger tree faller. They used to be all this stuff, and they should have moved into management and moved higher and higher because of the management skills they built up working with the crews and things like that. As they became older and they couldn't do the more physical work, instead of moving up and being able to use their knowledge and things like that to make firefighting better, they were put down into pump operator positions, you know, until they just got tired of it, and then they would retire and go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or cut out completely if, you know, they couldn't do a physical test or something. Yeah, so that's really, really frustrating. I mean, yeah, it's just amazing when you meet some of these people, like, you know, 30 years on the fire line, and they're still out there because they want to be there, and their knowledge is just insane. It would just be amazing, like what would happen if we would move those people into more decision-making roles for wildfire management agencies, like what would happen and what could change. It could be really exciting. So Natasha, in terms of the recommendations that you were talking about, is there one or a few that maybe you wanted to focus on just to kind of wrap things up here for folks that might be listening? I know that this was the first kind of pilot study in this area, and that I know that one of the recommendations is that there be more studies because this was really just brushing the surface. I mean, one thing I know that we talked about, Natasha, is that we didn't really seem to capture in this survey like the entry-level disgruntled firefighters who left. So maybe the guys who worked like a year or 2 or 3 and then just said, like, I've had it with firefighting. Like most of the participants we had tended to be a lot more experienced. So that is one area, I mean, that I'm interested in knowing more about their experiences, why they didn't stay. Any other recommendations there, Natasha?
I think kind of also we were looking at just from that research agenda side, if there was some opportunities to invite conversation for female Indigenous wildland firefighters hear more about some of their different experiences as well. So now you're blending again equity, diversity, and inclusion, but also having that gender-informed lens as well to it.
Interesting. I was just going to say, when you go out lots of times, and Joe, I don't know if you've had this, but there's lots of Indigenous female elders who were firefighters and, you know, involved in the fire camps and everything. And really, as things have changed, it's really turned into like a masculine dominated industry. Again, I know that people are recognizing that and know there's a major need for change there.
Yeah, over my career on the unit crew, of all the males on the crew, there's only been 2 female Type 1 unit crew members on the Merritt Fire Devils.
Oh, wow. Yep. And I think, like Joe said, I do see things changing. I think it's just like shining a light in some of these areas is sometimes the most helpful first step. And hopefully, we can continue to go. So I'm just wondering too, Natasha, so what's up next for you? What are you working on? I know you have a bunch of other fire projects on the go. Natasha's a busy lady.
So I'm having an opportunity right now to work with some great people with Amy, alongside Amy, as always, in the province of Saskatchewan, and that's the Muskrats to Moose project. So we're looking at some different tools and resources over the next year and a half that we can be putting together around cultural burning revitalization. Particularly, we'll be using as a geographic scope, the Saskatchewan River Delta. But we're all hoping that, again, we'll be able to kind of curate through interviews with firekeepers and elders that work, live, and play in and around the Saskatchewan River Delta to inform what are some best or promising practices around returning or enhancing, bringing back fire onto the land.
Yeah, and that's led by Métis firekeeper Solomon Carrier and his wife Renee, and they are just a powerhouse in terms of fire use, and they have developed a curriculum up there, and they have a book about, what's the book's title again, Natasha? Do you remember? Muskrats. Well, we'll put a link to their webpage below in the show notes as well, but it's about burning for muskrats. And yeah, they've just done a fantastic job and wanted to keep working in the area. So Natasha and I are trying to help them along with some other folks there. And so, yeah, Joe, so what's up next for you? What is, I know you're busy working with the Salish Firekeepers a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to continue along that path, bringing cultural burning back to the land and making connections, with knowledge keepers and elders and things like that to know the different reasons why things were burned and to pass on the knowledge that I have. And yeah, I think that's about it as far as I can. And
that sounds like a lot to me.
I'm really working on connections. I never did as an operations type person. Just having my head down and getting the work done and that kind of stuff, and not taking the time to talk to people or to listen to them or to bring it all together and be able to have an actual conversation. I've always just been the doer, I guess, and now to be able to step back and say, yeah, I don't have to be doing everything myself now. And if I teach somebody how to do it, then there's going to be a lot more people that know why cultural burning needs to come back.
That is exciting. That's awesome.
Yeah. Really
cool. Well, thanks a lot, you guys, for taking the time to come on and have this conversation. It's definitely an interesting one, and I'm glad to see that we're finally able to get this kind of stuff on paper, right? So you can start to, like you guys said at the very beginning, right? Now that once you start putting this into the literature, then it becomes hard to ignore. So, yeah.
Yep, definitely. Thanks, Natasha. Thanks, Joe.
All right. Thanks a lot for listening, folks. I hope you learned something. I know I definitely learned a whole bunch. The social aspect of fire, or social justice aspect, or how would I word that? I don't know. It's not something I really consider, but it's definitely obviously very important, and it definitely opened my eyes up. So thanks a lot to Joe and Natasha for doing that. And to you, Amy. Obviously, you were part of that study as well.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, for me, I've just met so many amazing Indigenous people out on the fire line who have so much experience, and yeah, always just heard their stories and how could we, give voice so that some of these things can actually change. And for me, that finding about the racism, harassment, and discrimination just stands out. Like, if you were a small business owner and 50% of your employees said that they experienced racism on the job, it isn't a very good place. But for some reason, we seem to accept that in wildland fire as just being part of the, part of what it takes to be a firefighter. And I'm really hoping through some of these things, like shining more light on these issues, that we can start to change.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And with more and more studies like this, hopefully coming out, and just it'll be harder and harder to ignore, right? So,
Yep.
Yeah, really, really, really cool study. So thanks a lot for listening, folks. Our next episode, we are talking to Nando. That's how you say his name, right? at the very beginning of the conversation, I asked him, I was like, I've been avoiding saying your name because I don't want to say it wrong. So hopefully that was right. Tando?
Yeah, Tando, I think. And so from Zimbabwe. So yeah, we're going to Africa to learn about fire. Yeah, so I don't know. For me, this was one I thought we missed out on season 1. Like, we tend to always focus on Canada, Australia, US, which is important, but there's also many other countries where Indigenous people are using fire. So super excited to talk to somebody from Zimbabwe.
Yeah, no, it was very cool to kind of, we kind of just painted the picture of the natural fire regime there and the local Indigenous people's relationship to fire and how they use it, and very agricultural in nature, very, it's a savanna, right? So it's a different situation, but it was cool to kind of paint that picture and learn and to gather those thoughts. So yeah, it was great. Really, really cool. So that's who we're talking to next time. So join us back here for episode 5 and we'll see you then. Thanks a lot for listening. A huge thank you to Canada Wildfire for their support of this podcast. As well, we would like to thank the Fighting Gunditjmara for allowing us to share their fire song Ween as the official song of Good Fire Podcast.